This playthrough is rated T for teen.
Chapter 7, Remembrance of a Promise, Los Angeles, December 24th, 1980, 1 p.m. With his remaining time dwindling rapidly, Hyde decided there was no time but the present to head into town for some last-minute Christmas shopping. That night, he would finally be seeing Rachel and Mila again, and he needed to find just the right present for each of them. Christmas songs assaulted him from every angle. The stores had huge Christmas trees standing by their doorways, and hundreds of people with gleeful smiles jostled past one another, clutching presents in their hands. On Christmas Eve, 25 years earlier, Hyde and his mother had moved away from town and started living in Manhattan. When they arrived, there were Christmas songs playing there too, even amidst that metropolis of skyscrapers. Hyde wasn't especially fond of Christmas songs. Whenever he heard Jingle Bells, it reminded me of his 9-year-old self clutching his mother's hand as the two of them walked through an unfamiliar city where they didn't know a soul. As he walked back to the apartment building, however, the only thing his mind was the promise he made to Rachel about that night. A resounding buzz indicated that someone had come to see him. Hyde opened the door, and standing there alone before him was Mila. "She's here a little early for dinner." He apologized immediately for missing her when she stopped by. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when you called in the other day, Mila." "That's all right," she replied. Next time, she said she would let him know in advance that she was coming. That was what Rachel had told her to do. "As far as I knew, we were planning on meeting up tonight," said Hyde, more softly than his usual gruff tone. This was met with a pained smile from Mila. "I'm afraid the dinner's been canceled." "Well, what do you mean?" She looked away from him. "Ed's been taken to the hospital." "What?" He couldn't believe it. It stood to reason, though. Ed had an ongoing heart condition. Hyde could recall a previous occasion where he'd put himself under too much stress, had an attack. Apparently Rachel was by his bedside. "Hope the old man's all right." Mila explained that Rachel had urged her to rush over and tell Hyde that their dinner was canceled. Hyde was glad that Rachel had been so thoughtful, but he was worried about Ed's condition. He also felt sorry for Mila. She had obviously been greatly looking forward to Christmas Eve, and now something awful had happened. Concerned as he was about Ed, though, he knew that Rachel would stay by the man's side no matter what, and let him know as soon as there was any news. He tried to brighten the tone of the conversation slightly. "How about we go out for a meal another time? Once Ed is out of the woods, I'll take you both out, just as we planned." But if anything, she looked even more crushed. She shook her head. "I have to go back to Seattle tomorrow." Mila had a winter project that she needed to finish before her break was over. "I'm just glad I got to see you before you left," said Mila. "Is that the reason you came here?" Mila nodded vigorously. All of a sudden, the phone rang. He hoped it was Rachel. He wanted to hear about Ed's current state as soon as possible. "If it's Rachel, do you mind if I answer it?" asked Mila. She picked up the phone in Hyde's stead. It seemed to be someone else, however. Looking slightly dejected, Mila handed him the receiver. "It's a woman. I don't recognize her voice." It turned out to be Jeannie, Kyle's mother. Hyde suddenly had a bad feeling about this. Like clockwork, Jeannie insisted on asking him about the young lady that answered the phone. "She's just a friend," he replied. She laughed. "Well, it is Christmas Eve. I am happy that you're not planning on spending the rest of the day by yourself." "Slow down there. She really is just a friend. You shouldn't jump to conclusions." But she just sidestepped his comment and changed the subject. "I'm not trying to back you into a corner or anything. You don't have to tell me. Anyway, I'm not going to hold you up for too long. I just wanted to let you know that I sent you a small package." So Jeannie had sent Hyde a Christmas present. The two of them had a long-standing agreement not to buy each other presents at Christmas, but she explained this felt like a special Christmas to her. This year, Hyde was the same age his father had been when he died. "Merry Christmas, Kyle," she said before hanging up. Hyde put down the receiver and explained to Mila that the call was from his mother. "Was your dad there too?" she asked. "He's not around anymore. Passed away when I was 9. Mila's shoulders drooped when she heard that. "Now I think about it, I don't really know much about you, Kyle. But you," she murmured, "you know pretty much all there is about me." It was true. Hyde was very familiar with Mila's past. Mila lost her mother at a plane crash when she was little, and her father, an art gallery proprietor, had raised her alone. It was her father that took her to Hotel Dusk and got her mixed up in the terrible incident that led to Mila losing consciousness and spending the next 10 years in a coma. When she finally woke up, her father was no longer by her side. He had been murdered. "Kyle, do you remember Christmas last year?" He remembered it well. The two of them had stood in the storage room at Hotel Dusk, gazing at the Christmas tree. Hyde had hastily decorated. At that point, Mila was mute and still had no recollection of her past. "It was wonderful, Kyle. The tree was so pretty. I'll remember it forever." Hyde felt the same. It had only been a year since then, and yet it had already become so ingrained, like a memory from childhood. "I just remembered, Kyle." Mila jolted them out of their shared reverie and produced a package from her bag. It was a present from Rachel. Hyde opened it. Inside was a bottle of his favorite wine. That wasn't all. Mila had a gift for Hyde as well, a picture of him that she had drawn herself. He was taken aback, but very grateful. I think he might have glossed over a few of my rough edges, though. Hyde was delighted, if a little embarrassed. As he marveled at the drawing, more of the past year's events came flooding back to him. With Hyde's help, Mila had overcome all kinds of trials and tribulations at Hotel Dusk and got back both her memory and her ability to speak. After that, she enrolled in an art college in Seattle. She couldn't get back those 10 years she spent lying on a hospital bed, but she was doing an admirable job of making up for lost time. She had found something she excelled at, and now she was making her own way on her own. There was plenty that she struggled with or that she didn't understand, but she had soldiered on and become far stronger than a year ago, without losing a bit of her kindness or innocence. At art college, I started studying right from the basics, said Mila. She was learning all about the process of interweaving each individual line to create line and shadow, she said, and she was loving every minute. Hyde took another look at the drawing of him, and he could see exactly what she was talking about. It was only a rough sketch, but the thickness of lines helped to create areas of shadow that defined his face. Hyde was very impressed. It was time, sadly, to come clean. I'm sorry, but I haven't got anything to give you, Mila. I'll get you something next year, though, I promise. He really wished he'd managed to find her something. He limited the fact that he wouldn't get a chance to see her open his gift and smile. I'm not sure I can wait till then, she replied, and after considering for a moment, she came out with a request that startled him. I'd like you to draw a picture of me. Hyde didn't have Mila's kind of confidence in his drawing ability. Flustered, he tried to say no, but she was usually obstinate about this. She really wanted him to draw her. Can't see that I've got a choice. Hyde opened up his notebook and tried as hard as he could to draw a decent drawing of Mila. With a slightly tense expression on her face, Mila sat perfectly still and didn't utter a word as she waited for him to finish. He never tried to draw a portrait like this before, so it took him some time. Eventually, he managed to produce something that he thought resembled her to a certain degree. When she saw it, Mila was overjoyed. She thanked her for his present and put it away as carefully as she could. Relieved, Hyde suggested the two of them go down to Lucky's Cafe to have a drink, but Mila said, Let's skip the cafe. There's somewhere else I'd rather go. She explained that she wanted to get a closer look at the lighthouse monument on the roof. Hyde enjoyed seeing her smile, and he wasn't about to disappoint her now. He'd be happy to take her up to the roof, he said. He led Mila out of his room, but before they could get very far, Charles came over and said that he needed to talk to Hyde. Hyde pointed Mila in the direction of the elevator and told her to go on ahead, and that he'd meet her on the roof in a few minutes. Charles had a fairly justifiable reason for accosting him. He wanted Hyde to return the spare key to room 205, which he'd lent him the day before. Hyde apologized for not giving it back sooner and fished it out of his pocket. As soon as he had finished his business with Charles, Hyde hurried to the elevator and followed Mila up. When he got out onto the roof, he looked and saw that Mila was standing over by the lighthouse monument. It looked a lot bigger from the ground, she said when he reached her. It's actually pretty small when you see it up close. Smaller than you thought, huh? Hyde smirked. His reaction had been exactly the same the first time he'd stood next to the lighthouse. Hyde told her all about up until 13 years ago. Hotel Cape West had been a hotel. He posted that the lighthouse had been put there because it went well with the image that the name meant to convey. Mila spoke in a quiet tone. I suppose you could say that the best use of the lighthouse is to guide people safely through the crowded streets of the city. That's how it was for me. 4 years earlier, Hyde had been lost at sea. It was all too much for him. He couldn't quite believe what had happened. His partner Bradley had been in an undercover mission that was about to see results, when suddenly he stabbed the police horse in the back. Hyde had felt the knife more sharply than anyone else. From then on, Hyde spent every waking hour asking himself, why? That simple question reverberated in his head thousands upon thousands of times. Soon he started on a quest to seek out Bradley so he could finally ask the question that had been burning him up inside so much. It was the only thing that kept him going. He had arrived in Los Angeles with a heavy weight on his shoulders, and the moment he had seen the lighthouse atop the Cape West apartment building, he was drawn to it. He decided to move in there without even checking over the room first. At the time, he hadn't applied any grand meaning to the monument, like it was showing him the way in the darkness or anything like that. However, there was no denying that, in a sense, he had really needed some direction in his life. Kyle, do you ever worry about things or get lonely? Is there anything that's troubling you? The question came out of nowhere, and Hyde had to think for a moment before he could answer. He tried to be as honest with her as he could. When I get lost in my thoughts, I sometimes feel like a boat drifting through the night. No lighthouse to beckon me in, just the menacing darkness and the waves. When I get like this, I just find myself counting the minutes till morning comes. The morning would come, as he opened up to Mila. Hyde was also trying to reassure himself. Yes, for now he was enveloped in darkness, but there was a light in the distance. The faint light of morning, and he was going to reach it. Just as long as I can find it, that is. Mila stared up at Hyde's rough-hewn face and asked in a fragile voice, Will morning come for me someday too, Kyle? Her question filled Hyde with the overwhelming feeling that no matter what happened, no matter how far their respective lives took him, he must never let anything happen to this girl. Don't you worry about that, Mila. You're never alone. If it's ever too dark for you and you're getting scared, I'll come and save you right away. You won't have to wait for morning. As he spoke these heartfelt words, he looked directly into her eyes. Suddenly, Mila was smiling from ear to ear. Mila needed Hyde. He was her rock, and both of them understood that. The two of them took a relaxing walk around the edge of the roof. On the opposite side of the lighthouse, they could look out over the park, where Hyde sometimes went for a stroll. He pointed out his favorite bench and told Mila about a black cat that sometimes showed up when he was there. It was a cute cat, he said, with a star in its left eye. It always seemed to remember Hyde and mew at him, expecting to be fed. Guess it won't be seeing him anymore after leaving this place, though. He explained that he had to leave his apartment. When she heard that the building was going to be demolished and the lighthouse monument along with it, a downhearted look crept under her face. The wind grew colder. It was time to see Mila off. They got into the elevator and he pressed the button. As soon as the door closed, they started moving. Then came a loud clunk. All of a sudden, the elevator stopped sharply. Kyle, I'm scared, said Mila, her voice wavering. While making an effort to calm her down, he tried pressing every button on the control panel. No response. What do I do? He banged on the door over and over again, but the sound just reverberated inside the elevator. No one answered. We really are stuck. But he refused to give up hope. He screwed up all of his courage, and with occasional pauses to try and boost Mila's spirits, he repeatedly pounded on the door and cried out for assistance. Help! He yelled. Somebody help! He kept shouting those same words, for he didn't know how long, when suddenly the elevator started moving again. At last, it reached the first floor and came to a gentle stop. When the door opened, Dylan was standing right outside. He had apparently heard Kyle's cries for help and pressed the elevator call button on the first floor. So the buttons on the inside are broken, but the ones on the outside still work? The elevator just stopped when we were between floors, said Hyde. Glad I got someone's attention by banging on the door like that. Dylan seemed very put out by the whole situation. He had just had the elevator repaired after all. I'm going to call them to fix it again, so do you mind keeping this between us for now? You know what Miss Patrice will get like if she finds out. Being trapped in an elevator did seem to have Mila left a bit shaken. But it was time for her to leave nonetheless. Perhaps Rachel will be with us too the next time we meet, she said, and with that implied promise that they would indeed meet again, she left the apartment building behind her. As if it had been timed to perfection, the second Mila was gone. Tony walked in through the front door like some kind of half-assed replacement. He was holding a package in his hands, and without Hyde expressing even the tiniest amount of interest in it, Tony started to explain what it was. It seemed while he was outside the building, he had bumped into the mailman, and without thinking, he had accepted a small package addressed to Max. Hyde, you gotta give it to her for me, begged Tony. No way, said Hyde, unflinching his coldness. Do it yourself. Tony put on a morose expression and appealed to Hyde again. If I see her now, she'll ask me why I haven't paid my rent yet. He sighed and took the package. I'll help you out this time, but get your act together and pay her the damn money. Just as he was about to walk away, Tony asked Hyde if he had any plans for this evening. Hyde replied that his plans had fallen through, to which Tony asked, How about joining me for a drink then? Hyde glared at him. I'll be honest, I don't like the idea of you sponging off me to drink all night. Oh, come on, it's Christmas Eve. I have no plans to sponge off anything off you. Anyway, I'll give you a shout a little later. He trotted up the stairs without even waiting for Hyde to reply. Shaking his head as Tony left, Hyde walked across to Mag's room with the package and knocked on the door. Hyde handed Mags the package, and she looked all over it to see who it was from. Suddenly, she froze in horror and explained that the sender's name wasn't written anywhere. Her hands trembling, she placed the package on the table and asked, Mr. Hyde, you wouldn't mind taking a look inside the package for me, would you? With a nod, he bent down over the table and carefully opened the package. Inside was a gold pocket watch. Mags breathed a sigh of relief, as she had been expecting something much worse to be inside that box. What did you think it was in there? Asked Hyde. Reluctantly, she admitted her suspicion. It was making a ticking sound, so I might have concerned that might have been a bomb. Also, he wasn't about to let her just brush that aside. Sure, it had turned out all right in the end, but if it really been a bomb, he wouldn't be staying there now. In fact, if she was genuinely worried about a bomb threat, evicting everyone from their apartments should have been the least of her worries. Was someone trying to save themselves some effort and get the building's destruction over and done with? He wondered. As he processed all of this, he became incredibly angry at Max's attitude towards the whole situation. He lashed at her. Miss Patrice, if you really thought there was a bomb and you made me open it instead, that doesn't say much for you, does it? Don't treat me like an idiot. Calm down, Mr. Hyde. As I was about to explain, it's not just that. The lack of a sender led me to recall something else. A worrying letter that I received a while back. Max retrieved a torn piece of paper from a nearby drawer and showed it to Hyde. He read it aloud. Ignore this warning and you'll face the consequences. Mags explained that when she received a threat implying that something terrible might happen if she didn't sell up, she thought it was someone's tasteless idea of a joke, so she tore it up and threw it away. But when Hyde had given her that anonymous package, it suddenly hit her that the threat could be genuine. Continuing almost in a whisper, she said, "There are all sorts of people living in this world, Mr. Hyde. People," she went on, "who might use any method necessary to try and get their hands on her apartment building, who didn't care in the slightest about the people they intimidated." Hyde sensed a distinct air of unrest about Mags. Mags apologized that he had to see her in this state and for how she had reacted in her confusion. Then, with a marked change in her demeanor, she asked Hyde, "Oh yes, who was the German young lady who paid you a visit today? It's a tad unusual for you to be entertaining a young lady like that." Hyde was surprised to learn that she even knew about Mila's presence, but apparently they had encountered one another in the lobby. When he reacted with a rather forbidding expression, she dismissed the matter, insisting that she was merely curious. "I have absolutely no interest in giving advice on who one should or shouldn't date." He decided now was the right time to break off their conversation, so as he said a quick goodbye and made his exit. Once he was back in the lobby, his pager started beeping. Figures. Where was that when Mags was asking about Mila? He headed back to his room to give Rachel a call. "I hope Ed's okay." In contrast to Hyde's apprehensiveness, Rachel's voice was just as level as he was used to. She gave him an update on the situation. Apparently Ed had been telling everyone not to fuss too much and that it was the same condition as always, but according to the doctor, this time was much worse than usual. "I'm going to take a trip to the hospital," said Hyde. "It'd be better if you didn't go for his sake," Rachel warned. "He'll do anything to avoid letting you see him in this weakened state." Guess she's right. I'm sure Ed's in good hands with Rachel around. "Kyle, are you upset that we couldn't meet up this evening?" she asked. "You know I am." "Right answer. Merry Christmas, Kyle." Saddened by the thought that he had again missed the opportunity to spend Christmas Eve with Rachel, he tried to make his Christmas greeting as heartfelt as possible. "Merry Christmas to you too, Rachel." Shortly after their call ended, a buzz came at the door. The package from his mother had arrived. Earlier, she had told him she had sent a Christmas present this year because he was the same age as his father was when he died, and that made it a special year. Hyde opened the box and found a baseball and a car key inside. He picked up the baseball first. He knew right away that this was the ball he and his father used to play catch with. He took a look at the key as well, but it didn't spark any particular connection for him. He wasn't quite sure why his mother had sent it. Christmas card was included with the present. He read the message inside. "Merry Christmas. In this package are some very precious things from 25 years ago. Your father had been keeping them in this case. Take care. Love, Mom." When Hyde's father was killed 25 years ago and his body was discovered in a downtown parking lot beside him, had sat the case he used to carry to work. Hyde became lost in thought as he wondered what memories and emotions this ball might have represented for his father as he carried it with him, and for his mother as she treasured the things her husband had been holding the day he died all these years. Thinking about the significance this present had previously held to both of his parents left Hyde overcome by the poignancy. The sunlight started to fade, and soon it was dim enough outside that Hyde had to switch on the light to his room. Just as he was doing so, Tony knocked on the door. "I've come to get you, just like I promised," he said, adding that tonight was on him. He seemed to be in a very good mood. Guess it wouldn't hurt to knock back one or two with him. Tony was thrilled when Hyde acquiesced. He said to meet him later at Lucky's Cafe, then darted back to his own room. Just as agreed, Hyde went to Lucky's Cafe. There he was greeted as ever by Claire's charming smile. "Did Dad invite you here too?" asked Claire. Hyde answered that it was actually Tony who had invited him here. "He's got a nerve," she said after he'd explained the situation. "Like he can offer to pay for other people." She expressed her shock at Tony's audacity in offering to pay for someone else's drinks when he didn't even sell his own tab. "Claire," Sydney came over to scold her, "Tony's a valued customer of ours, and don't you forget it." Claire seemed perturbed, however, that Tony was allowed to run up a tab, but no one else was. Didn't you also invite him here and tell him it would be on the house?" "If I want to spread a little holiday happiness on the night before Christmas, I have a right," he insisted. Hyde started to feel a little awkward about the whole situation. Truth is, I only came here tonight because Tony asked me to. He promised to cover my bills too. That's quite amusing. Hyde asked what was so funny. Sydney explained that when Tony had asked if he was okay to bring a friend, he had assumed he meant a girlfriend. Guess you must have softened him a bit now and then, am I right?" asked Sydney, looking at Hyde with an inquisitive stare. For his own part, Sydney said he had been a fan of Tony's music ever since the glory days. Hyde thought back to the song Tony had played him the first time 2 days earlier. He liked it a lot more than he expected to, and he could still recall the melody. Hyde wondered why Sidney didn't tell Tony how much he enjoyed his music, but Sidney had a strongly held conviction that prevented him from doing so. I'm a real fan, he said, and real fans don't need to make themselves known to the artists. They're happy to observe them from afar. They just sit back and wait for the music. Hyde thought that attitude made Sidney pretty cool. Tony's a lucky guy if he has fans or anything like you. Well, anyway, just remember, tonight's on me, said Sidney. Sidney seemed a little torn up as he pointed out that this might be Hyde and Tony's last chance to have a drink here together, so Hyde didn't see any sense in arguing with them. Sidney also asked Hyde to pick something from the jukebox, so he went over and took a glance at the selection while he waited for Tony. Sounds like a pretty smooth tune. He put on Joke's on You. The scratchy music started flowing from the speaker of the jukebox. Hyde was just on his way back to his seat when Tony strode into the cafe, a real spring in his step. It soon became clear that Tony was in a mood for some serious drinking. Maybe you should consider slowing the pace, said Hyde, doing his best to appeal to Tony's better nature. You know, don't want to bankrupt Sidney? Tony flushed in shame as he realized that Hyde had rumbled him. Come on, don't take it so hard. What's a little embarrassment among friends? The last words made Tony's face light up. He threw his head back and laughed out of sheer joy. Here was Hyde, sitting across from Tony and watching him laugh his head off. Spending Christmas Eve with someone else like this provoked a curious feeling in him. Not a bad feeling, though. Not by any means. Hey, Sidney, cried Tony. We're ready to order. Sidney came over and informed them that he was still preparing their food and suggested that they play some billiards while they waited. Lucky's Cafe was home to a fully fledged billiards room that might have been a vestige from the hotel era. Taking Sidney's advice, Hyde and Tony went to the billiards room. It had been a while since Hyde had last held a billiards cue in his hand, but he was sure his former prowess would return once he got warmed up. The two of them made a bet. If Hyde won, Tony would perform a song, while if Tony won, Hyde would buy him a glass of the finest liquor in the house. Hyde was eager to hear that song again, and Lucky's Cafe would be the perfect venue. They agreed to determine the winner based solely on the break shots. Whoever potted the most balls would claim the victory. It seemed perfect, since it wouldn't take long, they only had a short wait before their food was ready. They decided to make it the best out of three. Their showdown commenced. I'll go first, said Tony, grabbing a cue. He shot the cue ball and it struck the other balls, spreading them out from their carefully arranged starting positions to various points all over the table. Next it was Hyde's turn. The moment he started to line up his shot, he felt his intuition for the game coming back to him from the depths of his past. The final score was 2-0. In the end, Hyde won. Tony asked Hyde where he'd learned the skills to play billiards, and Hyde answered that he had lived in Manhattan and he'd often visited a pool bar with friends of his. At the time, he and Bradley had been very into billiards, and as police officers, a game that requires timing and concentration held great appeal. He still wasn't entirely sure how much it improved their skills, however. Damn, I lost, said Tony. And gone and forgotten my guitar, though. How about I play you a song later? Actually, I'd like to change the plan slightly. Instead of playing it for me, there's someone else I'd like you to play it to. He told him that the person he was talking about had been a fan ever since Tony's days as a successful artist, and had never lost faith in him. Hyde asked if he would play his new song for this dedicated fan. Tony nodded, a proud smile on his face. Sidney popped his head in, perhaps to tell them that their food was ready. Claire was with them. When the two of them heard the details of the break shot competition, they both wanted to join in. Tony left to go and have a drink in the meantime, so Hyde was about to face both of his new opponents alone. If he won against Sidney, he would be able to drink the finest vintage bourbon Sidney owned, and if he beat Claire, she'd make him a wonderful Christmas meal of her own creation. These seemed like fair conditions, but Sidney had a certain confident air about him. Sidney unleashed his first shot. The final score between them was 2-0. Ultimately, Hyde won. Next up was Claire, Sidney's protege. She put up some stiff competition. It was quite a match. Claire had a real knack for the game. The final score was 2-0. Hyde won. It had felt great to play billiards again. He'd even worked up a bit of a sweat. When he got back to the cafe proper, a seldom-seen customer was sitting at the counter. It was Will White from 306. Hyde rarely saw him in the building at all, let alone here. In fact, he was certain this was the first time he'd ever seen Will patronizing Lucky's Cafe. Will knocked back his drink in a single gulp and slammed his glass back down on the table. Then he said, Well, hello there. Well, hello there, Mr. Hyde. Are you by yourself? Hyde responded to the contrary. He was accompanying a friend. That's a shame, said Will. I've been waiting for an opportunity to have a drink with you for some time. Tell you what are you having? Maybe we could have just one drink together. Hyde flatly refused. We're both going to be leaving this place shortly anyway. What's the sense in making friends if we won't ever see each other again? Just because we have a few things in common doesn't mean we'll get along. Will laughed and said that he'd expected just such a reaction. I didn't see the humor in the situation and raised his voice without thinking. Something funny. Will apologized for laughing and then started analyzing Hyde. As I said, that reaction was precisely the sort of thing I was expecting. You're stubborn and selfish and like everything to go your way. You have a distinct inability to read the emotions of others and are outspoken. You have no qualms about ordering other people around either, but you're keen not to let others learn of this trait. As word travels fast, in short, you have a very tiresome personality. Tell me, Mr. White, asked Hyde, do you normally run off at the mouth this much, or is it the drink speaking? Hope you don't talk to your customers this way. I'll let you guess, shall I? To be honest, I couldn't care less, sighed Hyde flippantly. I already decided that I've got far better things to do with my time than to talk to you, especially seeing as this is Christmas Eve, and I'm trying to enjoy myself. Hyde truly couldn't stand people like this, and he had no inclination to waste any more breath on him. It was Christmas Eve, after all. Will responded to Hyde's tirade with a comment that he thought Hyde would ultimately regret turning down his offer to talk to him. He left the cafe without another word. Soon, however, another familiar face came into the cafe. It was Betty. I know it's technically still a day early, she said with a boundless enthusiasm, but Merry Christmas. The moment Betty entered his line of sight, Tony's face lit up and he started talking to her. It seems that the plans she had made for the evening had fallen apart, something she seemed less than thrilled about. She said she was in the mood for a few drinks, however, and invited Tony to join her. Tony was anxious about the fact that he'd failed to buy her a present like he had promised, but she didn't mind a bit and even offered to pay for his share of the drinks. I'm sorry, Hyde, but you know how it is. I gotta go with her. Lousy traitor, said Hyde under his breath. But if Tony heard Hyde's accusations, he didn't let it show. He just waltzed off into town with Betty on his arm, a picture of Christmas cheer. Sidney was not best pleased when he realized that Tony had upped and left after he'd so graciously left her to let him eat and drink on the house. Claire was disheartened too, since the food was finally ready and now Tony wouldn't be eating anyway. But Hyde proclaimed that he'd eat Tony's portion too. In an instant, Claire wore the biggest smile he'd ever seen as she led him to his usual seat. Once he was sitting comfortably, Claire brought over the food. He was presented with a glass of Sydney's finest vintage bourbon and an extra generous serving of roast chicken. The chicken was tender and juicy with deliciously crisp skin. It truly was cooked to perfection. Hyde ate much more slowly than usual. He wanted to take the time to savor this special Christmas Eve meal. Claire stayed and watched him eat, happy that he was enjoying it so much. Is it good? She asked. While talking to him, she was playing on a small handheld game system. Did you win that? Asked Hyde. It was the same Pinky Rabbit game that could be won from the juice bottles sold in the vending machine in the lobby. She boasted that she had tried her luck over and over again, and finally she got one just in time for Christmas. Do you have one too, Mr. Hyde? I've only just started playing it, but I'm going to rack up the best high score of anyone in the building. Just you wait and see. Idly, she wondered what score she would have to beat to reach that status. The glass of bourbon still in his hand, Hyde simply answered 0. Claire laughed heartily. Is that your high score, Mr. Hyde? I'll beat that in no time. After a while, Claire rushed off, telling Hyde and Sidney that she was heading out to meet a friend. The two men were left alone in the cafe. Sidney turned off most of the lights, leaving only the counter fully lit. At once, the atmosphere changed entirely. They were a world away now from the usual bustle of the cafe. This was more calm, more mature. With a ceremonial manner, Sidney retrieved a bottle of brandy from the shelf and poured some out for Hyde. The brandy was 20 years old, and it looked like molten amber as it swirled in the glass. Sidney joined him in having a glass. You know, when my ex-wife and I used to run this place, we'd always have a quiet drink together after closing time, just like this. Why did the two of you separate? Sidney answered frankly, It wasn't her fault, it was mine. I was way too stubborn. After taking the empty glasses away and putting them on the table behind him, Sidney suddenly asked if Hyde was familiar with the song called Promise. Hyde shook his head, and Sidney suggested that it was the perfect track to listen to on Christmas Eve. He stood up and got a record from behind the counter, which he then placed in front of Hyde. This record held some very precious memories for Sidney. It was the only copy left in the shop where he bought it, but Claire's mother had gone there at the same time to buy the exact same record. That was how they first met. Let me guess, that's when you fell in love, right? Absolutely, said Sidney. It was love at first sight. What kind of woman was she? Asked Hyde. She was the best, at least the best for me. Do you still feel that way even though you're separated? Sidney laughed gently. Of course! Sidney made a lighthearted jab at Hyde for letting the conversation take such an embarrassing turn and asked if he wanted another drink. I think I've reached my limit, he replied. Fair enough. Then it's probably time for me to shut this place up for the night. Sidney made a start on closing up. Hyde thanked him profusely for the wonderful evening and made his way out. The lobby seemed oddly still and quiet with the glow of the cafe's neon sign extinguished. Hyde returned to his room, all alone in the night. He didn't feel like going to bed just yet, so he put on the record Sidney had lent him. It had a beautiful melody, but it filled his room with a sense of deep loneliness. It was a melancholy tune. Emotions that had become lost to Hyde began stirring in the depths of his heart. As he sat in perfect stillness and stared into space, he felt like a forgotten memory was just barely out of reach. Alright, time for the classifieds. Notes concerning Kyle Hyde, Part 7, Memories of Christmas. If you were to ask someone about their memories of Christmas, there's a strong likelihood that they will begin to recount a story from their childhood. During my research into Kyle Hyde's youth, I interviewed his elementary school homeroom teacher, Sarah Hartman. She was kind enough to tell me about an event that happened shortly before Christmas when Kyle was 10 years old. When Kyle first moved to Manhattan, he was very quiet and kept to himself a lot. Even 3 months after he transferred in, he hadn't really opened up to me or any of the other students. His mother was very concerned about him at the time as well. I remembered her coming here to talk to me about him on their breaks. Miss Hartman, who was still a teacher at the time of my research, remembered Kyle well. I don't suppose it's too strange that he acted like that. He lost his father out of the blue and then had to move to an unfamiliar city. Of course, he'd find it hard to come out of his shell, but I knew I had to be patient, that it was just a matter of time. Whatever Miss Hartman said to him, his responses only amounted to a word or two. She decided to try a slightly different tactic. Every Friday, she would choose a book for him from the school library and give it to him to read. Then on Monday, she would ask him to tell her what he thought of it. At first, he just gave the books back to her without a single word about his opinion. One day, however, she tried giving him a science book to read. The following Monday, Kyle told her that he'd found it interesting. After I searched the library for every science book I could find to lend to Kyle on Fridays, little by little he started using more words to tell me what he thought of them. After that, he started opening up to me, a bit more to me and his classmates. According to Miss Hartman, Christmas that year was when he finally became comfortable around her and the other students. That Christmas, I got my students to put on a bit of an event. I separated them into groups and told each group to come up with something they could present in front of the class that others would enjoy watching. Some groups sang songs, some performed skits, and so on. Every group thought up their own little show, but you'd never guess what Kyle's group did. They conducted a simple scientific experiment, posing the question, what happens when you shine a light onto a mirror that's been covered in clear red wrapping? Then let the light reflect onto a mirror covering in clear blue wrapping. What color does the light end up? They asked this question and then asked everyone to think about it. What do you think the answer was? The result suggested by Kyle's classmates was myriad and included the possibility that it become purple like when red and blue paints are mixed, or that the reflected light would simply become blue. The one who came up with the experiment was Kyle, of course. It was the first time he'd ever voluntarily raised his hand and presented an idea to the others. The result of the experiment that was what the light disappeared entirely. Light is essentially a mixture of various colors, each at a different wavelength. When the light was shined on the red mirror, only the red light was reflected, and when it was shined on the blue mirror, only the blue light was reflected. All the other colors, wavelengths, were absorbed and thus disappeared. Thus, when the light reflected off the red mirror was reflecting again off the blue mirror, all the light had been absorbed and disappeared. It was a curious development, said Miss Hartman. No one had managed to guess the right answer, but the children were absolutely fascinated by this experiment. They really enjoyed it. That made Kyle so happy. He smiled and laughed with such enthusiasm. It was the first time I'd seen him with a real childlike smile. I still vividly remember how he looked at that moment. As a side note, the red wrapping that Kyle had used in the experiment was originally the gift wrap from a bottle of wine that Miss Hartman had received from her boyfriend. I was so sure that boy would grow up to be a science teacher or researcher of some kind. You say he became a police officer and now works as a salesman in Los Angeles? That seems so strange to me. I just can't quite imagine someone as quiet as Kyle doing well in those lines of work. From her expression, Miss Hartman seemed slightly concerned about her former students' well-being as we finished our conversation. I heard about another Kyle Hyde's Christmas experiences from Billy J. Coolidge, a friend of Kyle's whom you may recall me mentioning earlier. Christmas 67, Kyle was 21 years old. By that winter, he was getting to be quite the gentleman by his standards, all her doing, of course. Kyle had a girlfriend at the time. Her name was Christine, and they were in the same year at university. According to Billy, she was the one who taught Kyle the meaning of the word love. Billy told me an anecdote about Kyle and Christine's relationship. Those two got along pretty well, but they argued all the time, you know. It was kind of cute in a way. There's one time he forgot about a date that was supposed to be going on and got home real late with one of his buddies. It was unreal. The mirror in his room had the words, "How dare you forget about our date? I hate your guts," scrawled on a lipstick. Well, the buddy was me, actually. I was kind of worried for a moment, and then I noticed that after all those scary red letters was a kiss mark. I figured it was just a little in-joke between the two of them, and thank goodness for that. But as Kyle was to discover, sometimes fate stands in the way of true love. It was Christmas Eve, and Kyle had arranged to meet Christine that night in front of Rockefeller Center. He even arrived exactly on time, but by then she was on her way to the hospital in an ambulance, and she was in critical condition. Christine was killed by a stray bullet from a gun that had been tossed aside by a criminal during a police chase. When Kyle got to the hospital, she looked at him one last time and then passed away. He says that Christine lived on in his heart ever since that day. I asked him about it again the last time we met, actually, if he still loves her. He thought about it for a moment and then said, "It's not so easy to say whether I love her or don't love her, but she's definitely still a real special lady to me. Anytime I think about her, I get all emotional. Still hurts to think about what happened, but whether that's love, hard for me to really know anymore." Kyle must have had a special someone again by now, though. That same day, he told me something else interesting. He said that Christine was the one who taught him about the turbulent emotions and deep sadness that love can involve, but he didn't learn how much joy and tranquility love could bring him until he moved to LA. In any case, Kyle Hyde certainly seems to have a lot of Christmas memories that revolve around women.